What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Necromancer healer. Quite a bit of a weird thing to say, especially with Necromancers kind of being tied with death in most other MMOs. However, in ESO, Necromancers do make okay healers. They have a couple of interesting abilities in their toolkits that can definitely provide some group utility. However, there are some downsides for running those abilities, or some limitations with running those abilities, and so Necromancer healers, while they do have some strengths, those weaknesses sort of cancel out those strengths overall. They're still capable of healing all pieces of content in the game, but as we'll go over in this video, there are a couple of things you want to keep in mind if you decide to run a Necromancer healer. They are still pretty potent, not quite as good as Wardens or Templars, but still potent healers in ESO. Just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, basically everything you need to know to recreate this build yourself. Now, as a support role, we will be going over a lot of different skills and a lot of different sets that you're going to want to have on hand for the various encounters in the game. Specifically for vet trials, depending on the fight, depending on the strategy that you're running, you might be asked to run various different sets by your raid leader. So it's always a good idea to have a lot of different sets on hand in case you do need to pull them out for whatever strategy you might be doing for a specific trial. So I'll just be going over some of the more popular sets that healers will be using, and then just keep in mind that your raid lead might ask you to run some other set depending on the strategy that you intend to use. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So again, this is just one of many different gear combinations. There are many gear sets that you should have on hand. Starting off with the Monster Helm sets, a Symphony of Blades is probably going to be one Monster Helm set that you almost always want to have on hand. It's a very powerful sustain tool here, granting 20 through 25 resources back to anybody who is under 50% of their primary resource. So very powerful sustain tool. It does come from Depths of Malatar, however, so you will need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC to get this set here. Kind of along that same lines here, a lot of sets that you will want to run, for example Olorime and other sort of sets like that, will be locked behind expansions and DLCs. Some groups are alright with that. Other groups, on the other hand, might ask for certain sets that might be caught behind DLCs or expansions. So just keep that in mind if you do want to go into endgame PvE trial healing. Other Monster Helm sets that you could run instead of Symphony of Blades, there is quite an extensive list here. Going from the top of the list and working our way down, the first one is going to be Sentinel of Rkugamz. This is very nice for groups with a lot of stamina DPS because of the stamina return that it provides. 500 stamina to you and your allies within 5 meters of the spider, every second for 8 seconds, and this can occur every 15 seconds. So very strong sustain for just a Monster Helm set. Again, this is very good for stamina, but not so great for Magicka. While Magicka can certainly use stamina in certain fights, for example, when you need to use break free a lot, or when you're dodge rolling a lot, generally speaking, it's not going to be all that useful for Magicka DPS. The heal is also not particularly strong, at least compared to some other Monster Helm sets. Next set is going to be Bogdan. Bogdan is probably the strongest Monster Helm set in the game in terms of raw healing potential, probably only matched by Earthcore, but Earthcore is strictly single target versus Bogdan, which is AoE. So when you heal a target, you have a chance to summon a totem for 6 seconds that heals you and your allies within 5 meters of that totem for, in this case, 3290 health. This effect can occur once every 10 seconds. So again, a very strong AoE heal here. If you just drop right on top of the group, it'll heal everybody for that 3290 every second. So very, very powerful in terms of just raw healing potential done. Moving on from there, that's pretty much the two primary Monster Helm sets. There are a few that you might want to consider picking up just in case you might be asked to run them. For example, Lord Warden is one that we sometimes use in Mayflower Honor healers. Another one might be Earthcore, which is, again, very powerful self-heal, burst heal I should say, but it only affects one target in the area. The good thing with Earthcore is that it'll always proc on somebody who needs to heal, but with such a long cooldown and the fact that it only affects one person, it's not quite as strong as it used to be 2 or 3 patches ago. Moving on to sets. Healer sets are, generally speaking, divided into what I like to call body sets and then weapon sets or backbar sets. Body sets are, generally speaking, sets that you're going to want to wear on the body at all times because the 5-piece either is a static effect, so you can't necessarily use it with a special arena staff, or it's a set that you're going to want to have on the body because the bonuses are very powerful. Olorime is both of these sets. It can be on the body or it can be a backbar set because the 5-piece is a proc, but most people like to have it on the body. That way you can maintain that Magicka regen and max Magicka from the 4 and 5-piece on both bars. So Olorime comes from Cloud Rest, and it is the best source of Major Courage. The only other source of Major Courage in the game right now is going to be Spell Power Cure, but that does have some severe limitations that Olorime doesn't quite have either. So Olorime is by far the most popular healer set. You will always find at least one healer wearing Olorime in a Trials guild. From there, our back bar set is going to be Infallible Aether. Now, they did update it in Scalebreaker where if you run Infallible Aether on your Lightning Staff bar only, you do need to do a full heavy attack on your Lightning Staff bar to get the minor vulnerability. That's not that big of a deal. The channel heavy attack is maybe about 2.2 seconds or so, and there's plenty of additional time in your global cooldowns due to the changes to springs and orbs to get that heavy attack off. So it is definitely a powerful set to have on hand for the minor vulnerability here. If you're also doing some off DPS, the additional minor slayer and the sort of DPS oriented armor bonuses certainly help out as well. Then for our weapon, our front bar, we have the Master's Restoration Staff. It has been buffed as of Scalebreaker, where it returns 740 stamina for the initial heal of Healing Springs or Illustrious Healing. So it returns a lot more stamina now. And so if you just spam Illustrious Healing or Healing Springs, yes, you'll only get one of them to pop up, but every single time you spam it, you'll get some additional stamina back. So for stamina DPS heavy meta right now, this is definitely a very powerful set to use. There are some other restoration staffs you could use. The Asylum Restoration Staff, for example, reduces the cost of magic and stamina healing abilities after you use Combat Prayer. The Black Rose Prison Restoration Staff, for example, gives back major vitality whenever you use Healing Ward or Ward Ally. Then you have the Maelstrom Restoration Staff, which is not quite as strong. Basically, whenever you crit heal with regeneration, you end up getting a little bit of max Magicka back. Not that great because your sustain is already pretty much through the roof as a healer already, especially with the changes to Orbs and Springs, not really using up any sort of global cooldowns on Orb casts anymore, so the Maelstrom Restoration Staff is very rarely seen on PvE healers. For our back bar, we have a Lightning Staff. This is just for the additional off-balance uptime from Lightning Blockade. Very quickly, we're going to go over armor traits, enchants, jewel traits, enchants, weapon traits, enchants, and then we'll talk about the various armor sets you're going to want to have on hand. So, I like to go with Infused on my large pieces with Prismatic enchants and Divines on my small pieces with Max Magicka enchants. You can go with all Divines if you'd like. Generally speaking, though, you do want to try to get Prismatic enchants on your large pieces here for additional health. This is very helpful to have. Necromancers do have some additional max health here, and so you can see here with Clockwork Surge's Fillet and these Prismatic enchants and the Necromancer passive, we're already sitting at 19k max health without any health buffs. So that's without minor toughness, without Ebon. So Necromancer healers have some pretty good survivability aspects here. For our jewelry, pretty much there's only two main options when it comes to traits. It's either Arcane or Infused. Arcane for the additional resources, Infused for the stronger enchant. You can really pick whichever one you'd like. For enchants, you have two options again. You have the spell damage enchant or you have the Magicka regen enchant. Depending on what sort of resource you need more of, damage or sustain, you can swap out your enchants accordingly. Again, there have been changes made to energy orbs as well as Illustrious Healing and Healing Springs that you can only cast one at a time. And so sustain on a healer is actually fairly good now because you just need to shoot out one orb pretty much every 10 seconds. Basically, you don't need as much magic regen anymore, so a lot of healers have been swapping over to a more spell damage oriented build, so more spell damage enchants. For your front bar restoration staff, I have powered here with a weapon damage enchant, but you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to traits and enchants. Infused, Defending, Nirn, those are the three other popular choices. Infused for the additional enchant strength, Nirn for the additional spell damage, which improves your healing ability, as well as DPS ability if you are doing some sort of off DPS, and then Defensive for some additional resistances. Not very popular compared to the other three, but still sees some use. Decisive is also another popular trait to use for faster Warhorn uptimes, to get your ultimate up a little bit faster. In terms of enchants, weapon damage enchants are popular, as are weakening enchants, absorb Magicka enchants. Those are the three most popular ones that I've seen, at least on the front bar. On the back bar, you're going to go with Infused with the shock damage enchant. Shock damage procs Concussed, which is required if you want to set things off balance with Blockade of Storms. Combined with the shock damage enchant, if you have a charge trait on your front bar, you increase the chance of applying concussed by the percentage that charge gives you, 220%. So charge on the front bar is a potentially good option if you're running a shock damage enchant on the back bar. Not all healers will be running shock damage enchants, but most healers will be running an infused shock damage enchant on the back bar. Combined with the charge on the front bar, you basically have a 2-second, basically every 2 seconds you have a chance to proc concussed, and the chance to proc it would be very high with charged as well as the Destro staff passive. In terms of other armor sets that you're going to want to wear, we're going to start off with dungeon sets and then move on from there. Under the light armor dungeon sets, you have Sanctuary, we're just going straight down the list here, which comes from Banished Cells. Not a particularly strong set, mainly because healing received is not particularly useful. It's very easy to overheal in this game, and so additional healing received is not really seen as a very strong 5-piece bonus. In addition, it only has a 10-meter radius, so you pretty much have to be within melee range. Now, it does see some use in certain trials, so for example, Cloud Rest to help combat Baneful Mark, and you might see a healer run use it on the Kestis hard mode when you're progressing through that for additional heal to help out with ice prisons. But generally speaking, Sanctuary is a very niche set to be used. Moving on from there, we have the Worm's Raiment, which comes from Vaults of Madness. This reduces the cost of magic abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 other group members. So very powerful in Magicka DPS oriented groups. Cloud Rest, Asylum, very strong there. However, in stamina heavy groups, obviously Worm is not going to be quite as strong. Moving on from there, we have Jorvuld's Guidance, which comes from Scalecaller Peak. Increases the duration of all major buffs, minor buffs, and damage shields you apply to yourself and allies by 40%. Note that for damage shield, this is duration, not strength, so you do not get 40% stronger shields with this. This is mainly used to help buff your major force uptime through Warhorn. Overall, going to be a pretty nice bonus to the DPS, although it's going to be smaller than most other support sets in the game. From there, Zen's Redress has been seeing some use on healers, but it's a little bit difficult to maintain the max uptime on Zen's Redress on a healer because you do need to have single target dots in order to get the additional damage damage taken debuff. So enemies get applied this debuff whenever you do a light attack, and they take 100% additional more damage for every single target damage over time effect that you have on them, up to a maximum of 5%. Now, on some healers, this is going to be easier, but on Necromancer healers, it's not going to be as easy. Basically, if you're kind of being this off DPS kind of spec here, Zen's Redress is a potentially good option, but beyond that, you're typically speaking going to see Zen's Redress used more on a Magicka DPS instead. Next, Overland sets. There aren't many Overland sets that are good for healers, unfortunately. The only one that I would possibly consider recommending would be Way of Martial Knowledge. Basically, when your stamina is below 50%, your light attacks cause the enemy to take 8% additional damage for 5 seconds. This effect can occur every 8 seconds, basically for a max effective uptime of 5% additional damage taken debuff. This does require you to really micromanage your stamina. Your stamina has to remain under 50% in order to maintain this Martial Knowledge debuff. So it is a little bit challenging to use, but the return is fairly strong. 5% additional damage taken is not something to be laughed at. Plus, it does stack with minor vulnerability. So, really strong set here if you're able to maintain your stamina to be below 50% max health. Beyond that, though, none of the other Overland sets are particularly strong. Now, in terms of trial sets, there is one that I want to talk about, and that's going to be Eye of Nahviintaas, which is arguably a little bit more useful now that orbs are not consumed when you take the synergy, but in terms of raw cost reduction, not that great compared to something like Worm or Hircines. It's going to be a little bit weaker even if you're able to get them a synergy on that 20-second cooldown. So, Eye of Nahviintaas, not particularly great. It's really good for your personal sustain, but if you need to use Eye of Nahviintaas to sustain as a healer, you're better off re-examining other aspects of your build because really you shouldn't be having any sustain problems at all as a healer. I did mention Hircines. Hircines is a medium dungeon set that you want to have on a healer. Yes, it is medium. This does mean you need to get jewelry, you need to transmute the jewelry as well as weapons. Armor bonuses are not that great. Stamina regen, max stamina, not particularly strong. It's mostly for the 5-piece bonus, which reduces the cost of stamina abilities by up to 4%. By 4% for you and up to 11 other group members. So very similarly to Worm's Raiment, very powerful in stamina heavy groups, but not so strong in Magicka heavy groups. So things like Cloud Rest or Asylum you won't really be seeing Hersings being used because those two trials, typically speaking, will be using more Magicka DPS. And then really quickly, I do want to show you guys the other arena sets here. So the Asylum Restoration Staff, the Black Rose Restoration Staff. So Black Rose Restoration Staff adds Magicka regen. This is the perfect version, which comes from Veteran Black Rose Prison. The normal version of Black Rose Prison just drops the plain Black Rose Prison Staff. The difference between the perfected and non-perfect is that loss of the Magicka regen on the non-perfect version. The Steadfast Wards applies Major Vitality to your targets for 3 seconds. Situationally useful, very good in places like Cloud Rest or like Legacy's Hard Mode, where you have to kind of combat a healing debuff, but beyond that, not particularly strong overall. Next, the Asylum Restoration Staff, which has lost some power due to the changes to energy orbs as well as healing springs and illustrious healing. The perfected version comes from finishing Asylum on Veteran +2, so basically the Asylum hard mode. The non-perfect version drops from all other configurations. The difference between the two of them is the percentage decrease. So the perfected Asylum Restoration Staff reduces all healing abilities by 30% after you use Comet Prayer. The non-perfect version reduces it by 27%. So not that big of a difference. So the non-perfect version is perfectly fine to use here. Then the Maelstrom Restoration Staff is not that great compared to these two. The Maelstrom Restoration Staff, whenever you critically heal with regeneration, you restore 800 Magicka once every 4 seconds. Not particularly strong, this ends up being only 200 max Magicka, assuming that you're able to critically heal, every 4 seconds. Again, this is more sustain oriented, and as a healer, you shouldn't be having issues with sustain. You should not be needing to use a Maelstrom Restoration Staff in order to sustain whatever it is you're doing as a healer. So if you need to use this to sustain, you're better off looking at other aspects of your build or your playstyle to kind of see where you can adjust your regen and your overall sustain. Next, going over our character sheet, I am a Breton. Bretons are going to be one of the best races for healing. The other very strong race for healing would be the Argonians, which get 8% additional healing done. They also get max health and max Magicka. Plus they get a potion passive, which gives them 4,000 Magicka health and stamina back whenever they drink any potion. So your potion of spell power basically restores additional Magicka as well as health and stamina. So overall good for overall sustain. Bretons, on the other hand, get just raw max Magicka, so 2,000 max Magicka. They get 100 additional Magicka regen and 7% cost reduction to all Magicka abilities. So overall, really powerful sustain tool. As a Breton, you should have pretty much 0 problems sustaining as a healer. I'll punch going into Magicka here. Again, with Prismatics, the Necromancer health passive, as well as Clockwork Surge's Fillet, we're sitting pretty at 19k max health. Very, very good. This is before Minor Toughness and before Ebon, so with those two applied, we'd be sitting at around 21 to 22k max health, so no need for any sort of additional points into health. Running the Atronach Mundus for the additional Magicka regen. You could also go with the Ritual for higher heals. You could also go with the Apprentice for additional spell damage, which will give you stronger DPS as well as stronger heals as well. If you are a vampire, Vampirism is always useful to have for the additional sustain bonus. You get 10% additional Magicka regen when you are stage 2. The downside is that you do end up taking more fire damage, and your health regen also takes a hit. So you don't have to be a vampire. Like I said, as a Breton, as a non-vampire, you should be able to sustain on a healer very easily. But this is an option if you wanted to go that route. For food, we're running Clockwork Surge's Fillet for the health Magicka, as well as the Magicka regen. You can also run Witchmother's Potent Brew, which is a slightly weaker version of Clockwork Surge's Fillet. If you don't want the additional max Magicka, you just want the raw max health, the additional survivability, you can also run Orsgar's Red Frothgar, which gives you 5,000 max health, and I believe 459 Magicka regen, but you do not get any max Magicka, so your overall healing power will be reduced as a result of this. So you will notice that I have 2202 Magicka regen and 1857 spell damage. You want to try to get, my personal rule at least, is 2000 spell damage and 2000 Magicka regen before buffs, so after buffs these obviously go up. Here, even with max spell damage glyphs, I'm sitting just under 2000 spell damage. This is going to vary depending on your specific sets that you're running. So for example, if I'm running Infallible Aether on both bars, I would have the 129 additional spell damage, so I would be sitting closer to 2000 spell damage overall. Olorime gives me the 2 additional Magicka regen, so if I was running, for example, let's say I was running Martial Knowledge and Infallible Aether, my magic regen would end up going down, while my spell damage ends up going up. So I would be able to adjust my build accordingly to kind of offset that. For our skills, starting off with the Restoration Staff bar, we have Illustrious Healing, Combat Prayer, Energy Orb, Blood Sacrifice, Renewing Undeath, and Reviving Barrier. On our back bar, we have Intensive Mender, Mortal Coil, Blockade of Storms, Elemental Drain, Necrotic Potency, and Aggressive Warhorn. Now, we're not using Glacial Colossus here, mainly because Aggressive Warhorn does end up providing more DPS overall to the group. But if you're the only Necromancer in the group, then it might be worth running Glacial Colossus instead for the major vulnerability. But most Trials groups will have at the very least one Necromancer DPS, and so you don't necessarily need to use this. Aggressive Warhorn is going to provide, on average, a little bit more DPS in general. Now, in terms of your front bar sort of traits here, abilities here, pretty much all these first 4 abilities are what I would like to call non-negotiable. These are abilities that you should have on your bars at all times. Illustrious Healing for a heal over time, Combat Prayer for the Mana Berserk, Energy Orb for the Healing Combustion synergy, and Blood Sacrifice for the Burst Heal. Renewing Undeath would be used as sort of an AoE burst heal if you'd like. It also consumes a corpse as a cleanse as well as an additional heal over time, so that's not terrible, but it is arguably a ability that you could swap out. Reviving Barrier, likewise, is an ability that you could swap out as well. So, for example, if you want to do Glacial Colossus, you certainly can do so. But it's kind of up to you if you want to swap that out. You do get 10% additional Magicka regen if you have the Magicka 8 passive here maxed out. 5% at stage 1 and 10% at stage 2. For your back bar, Intensive Mender is another ability that I would consider non-negotiable. Mortal Coil, you can kind of play around with this. This is assuming that you'll be able to be behind everybody. So the additional healing beam does hit everybody, but that might not necessarily be the case. So depending on if you're using something like Martial Knowledge as well, you might not necessarily need the stamina regeneration. But even if you're not going to be using it for the heal, while it's slotted, you do get your healing done bonus of 3%. So you might want to still slot this on the front bar here for an additional healing done passive. Blockade of Storms, Elemental Drain. Blockade is definitely non-negotiable. You definitely want to have this down for try to get as much off-balance uptime as you possibly can. Elemental Drain, realistically, only one healer or one support needs to run Elemental Drain. So if your other healer is running Elemental Drain, you might not necessarily need to run it then. Necrotic Potency is another one that you can sort of flex out if needed. I like it to have it just because of the additional ultimate generation you get. Your Intensive Mender goes down. You can just use Necrotic Potency and you get additional 6 ultimate. Plus in trash pulls, you can just use this after the trash pull and you get a bunch of ultimate back for your Warhorn for the next trash pull or for the boss that you're going to be facing off against. Generally speaking, a very powerful ability to have if you have the corpses to use. Now in terms of other abilities that you might want to have on hand. Unnerving Boneyard is pretty nice because it does apply AoE Major Breach and Major Fracture. But sometimes you might have Necromancer Tank or Magicka Necromancer DPS that might be running this instead, so you might not need to run this. Under the Living Death line, if you're in a fight where you need to cleanse things from yourself and not necessarily need to cleanse it from other people, you can run Expunge and Modify if you'd like. But generally speaking, not a particularly strong move on a healer. And if you're cleansing something from yourself, chances are you also need to cleanse things from other people, and so you'd be using Purge rather than Expunge and Modify. But we already talked about all these other ones. Reanimate is an interesting ultimate here. It's a very expensive 335 ultimate, as you can see here. But it does instantly resurrect 3 allies. So if you're in a progression style guild, it might be worth running this instead of Reviving Barrier. Under the Restoration Staff line, you could use Radiating Regeneration as a very nice heal over time. It affects 3 allies, so really strong, really good spread. So pretty nice to have there. Then Healing Ward is actually a pretty decent move if you're comparing this with the Black Rose Prison Staff. While the shield persists, the target is healed for 43% of the shield's remaining strength every second. So if you think about it, about a 40% of your shield's remaining strength, 40% of, in this case, 5684, would be around just over 20k, not 20k, 2k. So pretty good as long as the shield can remain standing. So if it's not able to remain standing, then not going to be quite as strong. So if you are using Black Rose Prison Staff, I'd recommend running Healing Ward instead of the other Morph Ward ally. If ever you need a shield, don't be afraid to use any morph of annulment. Doesn't really matter which morph you choose. And then under the Fighter's Guild line, there's Ring of Preservation, which is going to be situationally useful. It does provide minor protection and has a small heal, but it only lasts for 8 seconds. Really, you're going to be using this in instances where you're going to be stacked up for execute. So, for example, against the Assembly General in Halls of Fabrication. Under the Sigil Order line, if you have access to this skill line, Mend Spirit or Symbiosis are pretty strong heals. It basically just changes your light and heavy attacks so that way you heal rather than damage. So pretty nice in those instances where you need the additional burst heal, strong heals. The heavy attack heal is a very powerful heal onto, and it's also a very good way to get some additional Magicka back. It is a toggleable ability, so just make sure if you want to go back to damaging things, you toggle it off. Then under the Daunted line, make sure to have all these abilities unlocked, with the exception of Inner Rage. There may be some instances where you might need to take the taunt, so for example, a couple strategies in DSA for the final boss require the healer to taunt things, a couple strategies in Black Rose Prison require you to taunt things, so it's nice to have this on hand, but don't feel like you need to get it if you don't intend on running those 2 pieces of content. Overflowing Altar for the minor lifesteal as well as the Blood Feast synergy. Shadow Soak for the damage synergy, which is a little bit weaker than it used to be, but still fairly decent. And then Bone Surge for mainly the synergy for the Major Vitality, as well as the additional shield. It just helps get some more outclash uptime going, and Major Vitality is useful in certain fights. Then under the Alliance War line, Efficient Purge here for cleansing things. If they're in a fight where you need to cleanse negative effects, you gotta run Purge. Next, moving on to our CP points. CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 CPs. Starting off with our green CPs, 100 Arcanist and 75 in Tenacity. You can shift points out of Tenacity if you'd like. The thing that I would definitely say you must have is going to be 100 into Arcanist. But beyond that, your green CPs can be placed really wherever you feel comfortable. We have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord here as an example. For blue CPs, the only 2 CPs that matter are Blessed and Elfborn for Magicka healer. So 100, 100. Now to give you the max on both of these nodes, it's 15% more healing done, and 25% additional critical healing done, with Magicka abilities. The other CP nodes are more DPS oriented, so you can kind of split them however you'd like. So for example, 49 Elemental Expert, 10 Spell Erosion, 11 Thaumaturge, that's perfectly fine, you'll hit all the jump points that way. Finally, our red CPs, this is going to be a one-size-fits-most approach. This is going to be 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. That's all the build information, so now let's go ahead and talk about healing philosophies in ESO. Generally speaking, healing, just raw healing, getting everybody up to max health, is actually a fairly easy prospect to do. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, overhealing is a very easy thing to do in ESO, just because of all of the damage healing done modifiers, healing strength, healing received modifiers, things like that. There are definitely some pieces of content in the game where healing everybody up to full health is going to be challenging. For example, Cloud Rest Execute, Lacasti's hard mode on the ice prisons, the constant damage from Black Rose Prison. However, generally speaking, healing is, while it is your primary job, it's a very easy job to fulfill. What separates good healers from great healers is buff uptimes and debuff uptimes. So things like your Comet Prayer, Minor Berserk uptime, as well as your ability to maintain synergies going for the tank running Alkash. So things like Energy Orb or any other sort of synergy moves that you might have on hand. So that's one of the things that Necromancer healers kind of are a little bit lacking in certain aspects. You do have some synergies, so for example, you can use Unnerving Boneyard for the Grave Robber synergy, which is always going to be useful here, so you could run this instead. Another synergy that you could potentially use is going to be Agony Totem, but that's kind of dependent on whether you're stacked up with the group, stacked up with the tank. You can also use Remote Totem to place it away from people if you'd like, but then you would be giving your tank minor protection, whether this is your DPS. So a little bit of argument there, plus Remote Totem doesn't have the synergy. You have to use Agony Totem for the synergy, so a little bit of risky business there, because you do need to drop this by the tank in order to get their synergy. So that's kind of one of the big challenges of healing, is that try to make sure you're getting synergies over. In this particular build, the only synergies you have are really going to be from Energy Orb and any other undaunted synergies that you might be able to provide. In terms of raw healing strength, Necromancers probably have some pretty decent healing, especially with something like Intensive Mender, which heals 8,000 health every 2 seconds or 8 seconds. Pretty strong heal over time ability here. So that's really the strength of the Necromancer, the fact that they have some pretty nice healing abilities. There are a couple of quirks, so for example your burst heal, Blood Sacrifice does apply Minor Defile on you, can be cleansed, but it's not that big of a deal getting Minor Defile, especially with how strong your heal is going to be. Your general rule of thumb as a healer for me is to use Comet Prayer mostly as a burst heal because it does give out Minor Berserk, so combining your heal with the Minor Berserk is always nice to do because you do want to get your Minor Berserk uptime up. Then always having an orb out at any point in time. So they did change energy orbs, so you can only have one orb out at a time, so it's pretty easy. Just think of it as a 10-second heal over time ability, so every 10 seconds you just want to push out an orb. Illustrious healing is very similar to energy orb. You only have one of these out versus stacking them like you used to in elsewhere. And so just make sure to have one out. And then for those high intensity situations, just use Comet Prayer as an AoE burst heal, or you can try to stack on a bunch of different heal over times to try to get people through high damage scenarios. Now, I do not have a Necromancer healer on live. However, I do know a few healers who have Necromancer healing. So, for example, I know Tabata does have a Necromancer healer that she has played at some point. So I will leave a link down in the description below to Tabata's Twitch channel so you can see whether or not you can find any sort of gameplay from a Necromancer healer from her. The best way to basically show you guys healing is to actually heal things, but unfortunately I do not main a healer, I do not have a Necromancer healer, so I will have to direct you towards Tabata. But that is it for this video. If you guys have any questions about the build or healing in general, please feel free to ask them here in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.